Okie dokie. So, here we are. And there you are, right on the other end of this camera. Hello. Good to see you. I'm Tad. I'm still here. I am still here. Had a long and very heartening day. So I'm pleased that I still have the relative energy to do some reading. And I thank you for joining me, all of you. Very, very nice of you. And it is a little after 1 o'clock, 1:01, and here in California. And as some of you know, we had the celebration of life for my parents. My mom, who died 2 years ago now, and my dad, who died last summer. And it went really nicely. We got to see a lot of old friends, but it was also just I won't go into a huge amount of detail, um, but it just was very heartening. My parents had a lovely effect on the people around them, and that was very much reflected in what people had to say at the event because we opened the microphone after dinner and let people come up and say something. And actually, the funniest thing was not funny, but again, kind of heartening was how a lot of people talked, and including both of Deb's and my kids, our biological kids, and people kept saying the same things over and over, as my brothers and I. It was just these kind of parade of people talking about what a difference my folks had made, and the love and support that they kind of handed out, and the way they just kind of kept open house for people. If we were having Christmas dinner, there'd always be people there who were sort of friends of the family or whatever, didn't have a place to go, and just and it's all true. It's all true. My parents really did always make an effort to extend welcome and good vibes and love and kindness to other people. And so it was funny because it was like listening to a symphony or something, where there are leitmotifs that keep coming up and coming up and coming up. And that was the way it was. And you would have thought we'd all gotten together ahead of time and said, okay, what are the most important things to talk about? And no, it just, that was the effect. That was the effect that my folks had. And I was really lucky to be raised by them, as my brothers, same way. And a lot of other people benefited from knowing them as well. So it certainly felt like the kind of send off that they deserved. And for various reasons, over the last couple of years, we hadn't been able to have a proper memorial, if you want to call it that, celebration of life, which has become a bit of a cliche now, but I don't really know anything else you can call it, because that's really what we wanted to do. We've been through a lot of the grief stage already, and we were lucky enough to be raised by these really incredible people, and we wanted to share that and get a chance to commune with some other folks who had known them and cared about them. And sadly, there's only a few of my mom and dad's generation still left who could travel, and so it was extremely nice to be able to see some of them, some of their old friends and things like that. So that was grand, and it was a really nice, emotional, very emotional evening. So other than that, I don't have much to report. I've been signing pages again, because as soon as I finished the pages for this British special edition of the Dragonbone Chair, I'm now signing pages for the British edition of Stone of Farewell, which means I still have Green Angel Tower waiting. Oh my God. I'm very happy to sign books. It's signing tip-ins, like 1,500, 3,000 tip-ins. That's work. I try to prop myself up somewhere in front of something or listen to music or something, so I can distract myself. Because otherwise, you can imagine just signing your name 1,000 times in a row is not really all that exciting. But I'm so thrilled. I always have been that anybody would actually buy a special edition of a book they already have just to get a signature or to have me sign it or whatever. I mean, I still can't get over that. Um, it's just so cool. So I'm not complaining about the signing. I'm just saying that the actual act of doing a huge bunch of tip-ins, just like in other times back in the past when I've gone to like warehouses to do a warehouse signing, which literally you have like 5 people helping you, and you got people, opening the book to the right page, and then the next person like putting it in front of you, and you sign it, and somebody pulls it away and hands it on to somebody else who's stacking them on pallets. Other people are taking them away, and I've done as many as like 2,000 in, I don't remember how long it was, hour and a half or something like that, and it's it's an amazing experience. As an experience, it's quite daunting to think, God, people actually. I always used to joke that like the ones that aren't signed are worth more, but that was mostly because I'd been signing a lot at the time. Felt like I'd signed every book that was ever published with my name on it. But anyway, so not complaining, just to make that clear, about signing books for people, never. And tip-ins are fine too, but it is work. It is work, and I have to distract myself by like, watching a baseball game or something. Otherwise, I'm just sitting there signing over and over again going, I'm really sick of seeing my signature. What else? Working when I can on the Splintered Sun. It's been, needless to say, a fairly busy week getting ready for this thing and doing stuff and, checking in on various things. And Deb and I were out today buying the drinks and stuff, which reminds me the coolers are still in the car. And they're probably going to leak when the ice melts tomorrow because it's warm around here. Oh, bugger. I hope I kept the plugs on the bottom of the coolers. Anyway, not that you need to be worried about that. What else? Anything? Of course, the saddest part of the day, of course, was that we went out and we did the shopping for drinks part. And then we had to stop back at the house briefly. And of course, the dogs, as always happens, were locked in the bedroom, which is what we always do with them. They have water and, everything they need. And the Chihuahua has little pads on the floor he can pee on. John, the big dog, who never breaks rules, who is kind of pathologically wants to be a good dog, will hold it forever. So I also said, let's stop back on our way back because it's the direction we're going anyway, before we go over the hill. And we'll try and let the dogs out. And of course, we had to go back anyway. Deb had to get something. But of course, the dogs, as soon as we're back, they're like, oh my God, you're back. We'd only been gone like an hour and a half doing the shopping stuff. And, oh my God, you're back. We thought you were dead. And we thought we'd. And I'm like, I hate to tell you this, guys. We're going right back out again for many hours. So that's what we did. And they were just poor things. It's not much fun to be a dog and stay in one room on their own, but it's just what they've gotten into and what they're familiar with now. It's sort of a larger version of when you put them in a crate, and that makes them feel secure. They know the bedroom. They know that they're there until we get back. And, but they are so happy when we get back. My God, you would think we had just parted the Red Sea and led them to the promised land, just the bounding and the noises and everything. So, and that of course just makes me feel even more guilty when we have to go out and leave them. But what are you going to do? Sometimes you got to leave the house. That's all there is to it. Let me see. What else? Not much else going on at the moment. Just work and stuff and things and trying to get. This was a big deal for all of us in the family, so this has been marked on the calendar for several months, and, a lot of people's work, especially both of my brothers and their wives. Not that Deb and I didn't do anything, but that just, they really put in a lot of work and have been putting in a lot of work. So it's a relief to be done. It's a relief to be done. I feel like we did my parents right. They deserved, a chance to be celebrated because they were really, really fine people. And I say that, again, not just because they were my parents, because I just happened to be there. I just got lucky. but they spent their entire lives doing things for other people. And it's one of the reasons, by the way, this is the closest to politics I'm going to get on this particular broadcast. And it's not really politics, but it's one of the things that drives me absolutely mad is when, I'm reading something on the internet and people are going like, how is it that, why don't atheists just go crazy and murder people? Not that any of my family and I or anybody in my family were like, we call ourselves atheists. I mean, I think all of us are kind of like, how would we know what makes the universe run? All we can do is follow the information, see what's been learned so far, keep up with it, be interested in it. But we don't claim to be able to say there is no this or there is no that. Like, my personal feeling is like, I don't particularly believe in gods, anybody's gods. But that's okay. I don't care if other people do. That's fine. But anyway, but one of the things that really, really crumples my taco is when people say, like, oh, well, atheists, I mean, how do they know how to live without doing this? Aren't they just immoral, this and that? It's like my parents had no religion, either of them. My dad, sort of, his mom was not kind of formally religious in the sense that she wanted the kids to get christened and stuff like that. I think they were Episcopal. My mom's family didn't have any religion at all, and we were raised without it. As a matter of fact, I should tell you a good story quickly about, if I haven't told this already, I think I might have, about our son and the church that he saw. Anyway, I'll tell it later on. But anyway, so nobody in our family was raised with any kind of religion. The closest I've said, and this is not a joke, the closest is my brother Arthur, when he was a baby, was the baby Jesus in the local Congregational church's Christmas thing. So my parents, Barbara and Joseph, came down to be Mary and Joseph as a favor to some of the friends that were at that particular church, and they knew people there and all that. But they were not churchgoers themselves, and they were not religious at all. They never told us, don't be religious or anything ridiculous like that. They just let us make up our own minds, and if we asked them questions, they would answer them honestly. Anyway, but they were also two of the most moral people I have ever met, and it makes me nuts when I feel sorry for people who think that you have to have a religious dogma. I'm totally down with religious dogma for anybody that it works for. If it works for you, I've said this before, if it works for you, great. If it makes you a better person, great. If it helps you to be kind to others, to have a positive outlook on whatever it is that you use your religious beliefs for, if it makes you a better person and better to others, go for it. I'm totally proud of you. That's great. But the idea that everybody who isn't religious, that we're running around all the time just inches away from rape and murder. Because I was raised around people without any particular religion or a very thin connection to religion. And my family, and I'm talking about my larger family here also, my cousins and aunts and uncles and all that, most of whom were not religious at all either. Or, as I said, in the most formal kind of like going to church on Sunday way, but beyond that, no. Lovely people, really good people, really kind and good parents and good neighbors and all that stuff. And it just used to make me, still does, as you can see by watching me froth and foment here on screen. The idea that somehow there's some kind of connection between being a moral person and believing in a certain dogma, whether it be Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, not Hindi, but Ram, or, anything. Like I said, if you believe in it, great. If it makes you a better person, excellent. I wasn't raised that way. My brothers weren't raised that way. My parents weren't raised that way. And my parents set this incredibly high bar for being kind to other people and for being open-minded and welcoming and doing the right thing. And, my mother was a tireless volunteer for all kinds of organizations, from things that she was the head of, like, she was the head of the American Association of University Women for a number of years, and I did a lot of events with them. And when they did, like, they do writers things and authors things, and I became the sort of de facto master of ceremonies of many of those. And and also, neighbors abroad, and they traveled all over the world on their own dime to go to places that were sister cities of Palo Alto where they lived. And, just like I said, I mean, they set this incredibly high bar for kindness and working for your community and all that stuff. And good God, after my dad died and we started taking over the family, my brother is the executor, but we're all dealing with the family house and the family stuff. And Deb and I were living in the house at the time. And we, the amount of things that they contributed to, and I'm not just talking politics, I'm talking charities, I'm talking, groups that were advocacy groups for nature and all kinds of things, I mean, not just the Sierra Club, but like dozens of those things, and all kinds of feeding children things, and I mean, all this stuff. I mean, to the point where we just went, oh my God, all these organizations are going to go out of business now that my parents are gone. So, just the whole idea of anybody believing that you cannot be a moral person without somebody else's code of morals telling you what to do, just, it does. It absolutely winds my waffle. Anyway, didn't mean to get off on a long tangent, but obviously I'm thinking a lot about my parents tonight. Let me check in and see who's here, and then I'm going to read, and I apologize for taking so long to get to that point. So let's see what we've got here. And okay, I see Winter has checked in, and who else has checked in? Winter, Kristen. Hello, Kristen. Hello, Winter. Isaac is here. Hello, Isaac. Suzanne, pleasure as always. Sandra, good to see you. Wouter, my man. Mahmoud, my other man. Chris, yet another man. Yay. That's Chris Fab, by the way. Christian Fabricius, depending on how Latin you're pronouncing it, I guess, or how German. Rosalba, hello, Rosalba. Iris and Mark and Carol have all checked in. So lovely to see all of you. And now I'm going to read. Oh, there's a picture on the Facebook page of my brothers and I trying to sing a song together that we have not sung since my mom's funeral, and I could not remember the harmony at all. So it's pretty funny because I'm sitting there looking like, you're joking, right? You are going to sing this song, and I have to try and remember a harmony. Oh my God, it's been 2 years. Anyway, okay, so let's go back here and let's do this bit here, and then I'm going to read. Now, if you will recall, just to bring you up to date, Rat and Mole have been batching it together. They are English bachelors sharing quarters because Mole has left his home behind and hooked up with Rat, and they ran around and had some adventures on the river, and Mole's just kind of moved in because Rat enjoys his company. They have gone on a wagon trip, a carriage trip with Mr. Mole in a beautiful gypsy caravan with Mr. Toad, Toad's latest fixation, and they were run off the road by a car. This, of course, is supposed to be early 1900s, so it's, you can imagine kind of Model T type car. They've been run off the road, and of course, Rat and Mole were furious at the wreckage of the expensive carriage, but Toad has become absolutely enamored with cars. So that was the preceding bit. Then this chapter we're reading now, Mole has gone off into the woods. Unadvisedly, Mole, you're very silly. You should not have done it. But Mole has gone off into the wildwood on his own because he really wanted to go meet Mr. Badger and thought that would be an adventure because he's heard so much about Badger, and Rat has been kind of putting him off about going to meet Mr. Badger in an official way because Badger's kind of a big deal around the neighborhood. And So Mole was stuck out in the woods, got lost, was being chased by things, we don't know quite what, but we suspect weasels and foxes. And so Rat realized Mole had slipped out and done something dumb, and Rat's gone after Mole. And then they have been caught in a winter storm because it's winter time, and they have been wandering around in the dark and snowy wildwood, not knowing where they were, how to get back. And in the course of doing so, just as they're kind of on their last legs, Rat has found something and has been, well, I'll read you this bit, okay? Because Mole bashed his shin on something. But the Rat, after carefully tying up the leg with his handkerchief, that's the Mole's leg, had left him and was busy scraping in the snow. He scratched and shoveled and explored all 4 legs, working busily, while the Mole waited impatiently, remarking in intervals, "Come on, Rat!" Suddenly the Rat cried, "Hooray!" and then, "Hooray, hooray, 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 hooray!" and fell to executing a feeble jig in the snow. And as I think I showed you last week, there is Ratty doing a jig in his deerstalker cap and his winter coat. "What have you found, Ratty?" asked the Mole, still nursing his leg. "Come and see," said the delighted Rat as he jigged on. The Mole hobbled up to the spot and had a good look. "Well," he said at last slowly, I see it right enough. Seen the same sort of thing before lots of times. Familiar object, I call it. A door scraper. Well, what of it? Why dance jigs round a door scraper?" "But don't you see what it means, you dull-witted animal?" cried the Rat impatiently. "Of course I see what it means," replied the Mole. "It simply means that some very careless and forgetful person has left his door scraper lying about in the middle of the wildwood, just where it's sure to trip everybody up. Very thoughtless of him, I call it. When I get home, I shall go and complain about it to somebody or other. See if I don't." Oh dear, cried the Rat in despair at his obtuseness. "Here, stop arguing and come and scrape." And he set to work again and made the snow fly in all directions around him. After some further toil, his efforts were rewarded, and a very shabby doormat lay exposed to view. "There! What did I tell you?" exclaimed the Rat in great triumph. "Absolutely nothing whatever," replied the Mole with perfect truthfulness. "Well, now," he went on, "you seem to have found another piece of domestic litter, done for and thrown away, and I suppose you're perfectly happy. Better go ahead and dance your jig round that, if you've got to, and get it over with, and then perhaps we can go on and not waste any more time over rubbish heaps. Can we eat a doormat, or sleep under the doormat, or sit on a doormat and sledge home over the snow on it? You exasperating rodent." "Do you mean to say," cried the excited Rat, "that this doormat doesn't tell you anything?" "Really, Rat," said the Mole quite pettishly, "I think we've had enough of this folly. Who ever heard of a doormat telling anyone anything? They simply don't do it. They're not that sort at all. Doormats know their place." "Now, look here, you thick-headed beast," replied the Rat, really angry. "This must stop. Not another word, but scrape. Scrape and scratch and dig and hunt around, especially on the sides of the hummocks, if you want to sleep warm and dry tonight, for it's our last chance." The Rat attacked a snowbank beside them with ardor, probing with his cudgel everywhere, and then digging with fury. And the Mole scraped busily too, more to oblige the Rat than for any other reason, for his opinion was that his friend was getting light-headed. Some 10 minutes' hard work, and the point of the Rat's cudgel struck something that sounded hollow. He worked till he could get a paw through and feel, then called the mole to come and help him. Hard at it went the two animals, till at last the result of their labors stood full in view of the astonished and hitherto incredulous mole. In the side of what had seemed to be a snowbank stood a solid-looking little door, painted a dark green. An iron bell-pull hung by the side, and below it, on a small brass plate, neatly engraved in square capital letters, they could read by the aid of moonlight, Mr. Badger. Whoops! And there they are, standing in front of the door that they have just exposed. The mole fell backwards on the snow from sheer surprise and delight. "Rat!" he cried in penitence. "You're a wonder, a real wonder, that's what you are. I see it all now. You argued it out step by step in that wise head of yours from the very moment that I fell and cut my shin. And you looked at the cut, and at once your majestic mind said to itself, 'Door scraper.' And then you turned to and found the very door scraper that done it. Did you stop there? No, some people would have been quite satisfied, but not you. Your intellect went on working. 'Let me only just find a doormat,' says you to yourself, and my theory is proved. And of course you found your doormat. You're so clever, I believe you could find anything you liked. 'Now,' says you, 'that door exists as plain as if I saw it. There's nothing else remains to be done but to find it.' Well, I've read about that sort of thing in books, but I've never come across it before in real life. You ought to go where you'll be properly appreciated. You're simply wasted here among us fellows. If I only had your head, Ratty." "But as you haven't," interrupted the rat rather unkindly, "I suppose you're going to sit on the snow all night and talk. Get up at once and hang on to that bell pull you see there, and ring hard as you can, while I hammer." While the rat attacked the door with his stick, the mole sprang up at the bell pull, clutched it, and swung there, both feet well off the ground, and from quite a long way off they could faintly hear a deep-toned bell respond. Chapter 4. It's actually 2-page spread here. Chapter 4, Mr. Whoops, how do I get that other bit out in front of the camera? Mr. Badger. And there you see them outside, and Mr. Badger inside. And I really, if I knew what I was doing, I would have digitized these pictures first so that they could be put up on the screen properly like. But as you all know, I don't think that far ahead, at least not when I'm doing this. Chapter 4, Mr. Badger. They waited patiently for what seemed a very long time, stamping in the snow to keep their feet warm. At last they heard the sound of slow, shuffling footsteps approaching the door from the inside. It seemed, as the mole remarked to the rat, like someone walking in carpet slippers that were too large for him down at heel, which was intelligent of Mole, because that was exactly what it was. There was the noise of a bolt shot back, and the door opened a few inches, enough to show a long snout and a pair of sleepy, blinking eyes. "Now, the very next time this happens," said a gruff and suspicious voice, "I shall be exceedingly angry. Who is it this time disturbing people on such a night? Speak up." "Oh, Badger," cried the rat, "let us in, please. It's me, Rat, and my friend Mole, and we've lost our way in the snow." "What, Ratty, my dear little man!" exclaimed the Badger in quite a different voice. "Come along in, both of you, at once. Why, you must be perished. Where I never lost in the snow, and in the wild wood, too, and at this time of night. But come in with you." The two animals tumbled over each other in their eagerness to get inside, and heard the door shut behind them with great joy and relief. The badger, who wore a long dressing gown, and whose slippers were indeed very down at heel, carried a flat candlestick in his paw, and had probably been on his way to bed when their summons sounded. He looked kindly down on them, and patted both their heads. "This is not the sort of night for small animals to be out," he said paternally. "I'm afraid you've been up to some of your pranks again, Ratty. But come along, come into the kitchen. There's a first-rate fire there, and supper, and everything." He shuffled on in front of them, carrying the light, and they followed him, nudging each other in an anticipating sort of way, down a long, gloomy, and, to tell the truth, decidedly shabby passage, into a sort of central hall, out of which they could dimly see other long tunnel-like passages branching, passages mysterious and without apparent end. But there were doors in the hall as well, stout, oaken, comfortable-looking doors. One of these the badger flung open, and at once they found themselves in all the glow and warmth of a large fire-lit kitchen. The floor was well-worn red brick, and on the wide hearth burnt a fire of logs between two attractive chimney corners tucked away in the wall, well out of any suspicion of draught. A couple of high-backed settles, facing each other on either side of the fire, gave further sitting accommodation for the sociably disposed. In the middle of the room stood a long table of plain boards placed on trestles, with benches down each side. At one end of it, where an armchair stood pushed back, were spread the remains of the badger's plain but ample supper. Rows of spotless plates winked from the shelves of the dresser at the far end of the room, and from the rafters overhead hung hams, bundles of dried herbs, nets of onions, and baskets of eggs. It seemed a place where heroes could fitly feast after victory, where weary harvesters could line up in scores along the table and keep their harvest home with mirth and song, or where 2 or 3 friends of simple tastes could sit about as they pleased and eat and smoke and talk in comfort and contentment. The ruddy brick floor smiled up at the smoky ceiling. The oaken settles, shiny with long wear, exchanged cheerful glances with each other. Plates on the dresser grinned at pots on the shelf, and the merry firelight flickered and played over everything without distinction. The kindly badger thrust them down on a settle to toast themselves at the fire, and bade them remove their wet coats and boots. Then he fetched them dressing gowns and slippers, and himself bathed the mole's shin with warm water, and mended the cut with sticking plaster, till the whole thing was just as good as new, if not better. In the embracing light and warmth, warm and dry at last, with weary legs propped up in front of them, and a suggestive clink of plates being arranged on the table behind, it seemed to the storm-driven animals, now in safe anchorage, that the cold and trackless wild wood just left outside was miles and miles away, and all that they had suffered in it a half-forgotten dream. When at last they were thoroughly toasted, the badger summoned them to the table, where he had been busy laying a repast. They had felt pretty hungry before, but when they actually saw at last the supper that was spread for them, really it seemed only a question of what they should attack first, where all was so attractive, and whether the other things would obligingly wait for them till they had time to give them attention. Conversation was impossible for a long time, and when it was slowly resumed, it was that regrettable sort of conversation that results from talking with your mouth full. The badger did not mind that sort of thing at all, nor did he take any notice of elbows on the table or everybody speaking at once. As he did not go into society himself, he had got an idea that these things belonged to the things that didn't really matter. We know, of course, that he was wrong and took too narrow a view, because they do matter very much, though it would take too long to explain why. He sat in his armchair at the head of the table and nodded gravely at intervals as the animals told their story, and he did not seem surprised or shocked at anything. And he never said, "I told you so," or "just what I have always said," or remarked that they ought to have done so-and-so, or ought not to have done something else. The mole began to feel very friendly toward him. And here, whoops, wrong way around. There are the animals reclining in front of the fire, mole on one side, rat on the other, and badger with his back to us. When supper was really finished at last, and each animal felt that his skin was now as tight as was decently safe, and that by this time he didn't care a hang for anybody or anything, they gathered round the glowing embers of the great wood fire and thought how jolly it was to be sitting up so late and so independent and so full. And after they had chatted for a time about things in general, the badger said heartily, "Now then, tell us the news from your part of the world. How's old Toad going on?" "Oh, from bad to worse," said the rat gravely, while the mole, cocked up on a settle and basking in the firelight, his heels higher than his head, tried to look properly mournful. "Another smash-up, only last week, and a bad one. You see, he will insist on driving himself, and he's hopelessly incapable. If he'd only employ a decent, steady, well-trained animal, pay him good wages, and leave everything to him, he'd get on all right. But no, he's convinced he's a heaven-born driver, and nobody can teach him anything, and all the rest follows." "How many has he had?" inquired the badger gloomily. "Smashes or machines?" asked the rat. Well, after all, it's the same thing with Toad. This is his 7th. As for the others, you know that coach house of his? Well, it's piled up, literally piled up to the roof, with fragments of motor cars, none of them bigger than your hat. That accounts for the other 6, so far as they can be accounted for." "He's been in hospital 3 times, put in the mole. "And as for the fines he's had to pay, it's simply awful to think of." "Yes, and that's part of the trouble," continued the rat. "Toad's rich, we all know, but he's not a millionaire, and he's a hopelessly bad driver, and quite regardless of law and order. Killed or ruined. It's got to be one of the two things, sooner or later. Badger, we're his friends. Oughtn't we to do something?" The badger went through a bit of hard thinking. "Now, look here," he said at last, rather severely. "Of course you know I can't do anything now." His 2 friends assented, quite understanding his point. No animal, according to the rules of animal etiquette, is ever expected to do anything strenuous or heroic or even moderately active during the off-season of winter. All are sleepy, some actually asleep. All are weather-bound, more or less, and all are resting from arduous days and nights, during which every muscle in them has been severely tested, and every energy kept at full stretch. "Very well, then," continued the badger, "but when once the year has really turned, and the nights are shorter, and halfway through them one rouses and feels fidgety, and wanting to be up and doing by sunrise, if not before, you know." Both animals nodded gravely. They knew. "Well, then," went on the badger, "we, that is you and me, and our friend the mole here, we'll take Toad seriously in hand. We'll stand no nonsense whatsoever. We'll bring him back to reason, by force, if need be. We'll make him be a sensible Toad. You're asleep, rat." "Not me," said the rat, waking up with a jerk. "He's been asleep 2 or 3 times since supper," said the mole, laughing. He himself was feeling quite wakeful and even lively, though he didn't know why. The reason was, of course, that he, being naturally an underground animal by birth and breeding, the situation of Badger's house exactly suited him and made him feel at home, while the rat, who slept every night in a bedroom, the windows of which opened on a breezy river, naturally felt the atmosphere still and oppressive. "Well, it's "It's time we were all in bed," said the badger, getting up and fetching flat candlesticks. "Come along, you two, and I'll show you to your quarters. And take your time tomorrow morning. Breakfast at any hour you please." He conducted the two animals to a long room that seemed half bedchamber and half loft. The badger's winter stores, which indeed were visible everywhere, took up half the room. Piles of apples, turnips, and potatoes, baskets full of nuts, and jars of honey. But the two little white beds on the remainder of the floor looked soft and inviting, and the linen on them, though coarse, was clean and smelt beautifully of lavender. And the mole and the water rat, shaking off their garments in some 30 seconds, tumbled in between the sheets in great joy and contentment. In accordance with the kindly badger's injunctions, the two tired animals came down to breakfast very late next morning and found a bright fire burning in the kitchen, and two young hedgehogs sitting on a bench at the table eating oatmeal porridge out of wooden bowls. The hedgehogs dropped their spoons, rose to their feet, and ducked their heads respectfully as the two entered. There, sit down, said the rat pleasantly, "and go on with your porridge. Where have you youngsters come from? Lost your way in the snow, I suppose?" "Yes, please, sir," said the elder of the two hedgehogs respectfully. "Me and little Billy here, we was trying to find our way to school. Mother would have us go, was the weather ever so, and of course we lost ourselves, sir, and Billy he got frightened, and took and cried, being young and faint-hearted. And at last we happened up against Mr. Badger's back door, and we made so bold as to knock, sir, for Mr. Badger, he's a kind-hearted gentleman, as everyone knows." "I understand," said the rat, cutting himself some rashers from a side of bacon, while the mole dropped some eggs into a saucepan. "And what's the weather like outside? You needn't sir me quite so much," he added. "Oh, terrible bad, sir, terrible deep the snow is," said the hedgehog. "No getting out for the likes of you gentlemen today." "Where's Mr. Badger?" inquired the mole as he warmed the coffee pot before the fire. "Master's gone into his study, sir," replied the hedgehog, "and he said as how he was going to be particular busy this morning, and on no account was he to be disturbed." This explanation, of course, was thoroughly understood by everyone present. The fact is, as already set forth, when you live a life of intense activity for 6 months in the year, and of comparative or actual somnolence for the other 6, during the latter period you cannot be continually pleading sleepiness when there are people about or things to be done. The excuse gets monotonous. The animals well knew that Badger, having eaten a hearty breakfast, had retired to his study, and settled himself in an armchair with his legs up on another, and a red cotton handkerchief over his face, and was being busy in the usual way at this time of the year. The front door bell clanged loudly, and the rat, who was very greasy with buttered toast, sent Billy, the smaller hedgehog, to see who it might be. There was a sound of much stamping in the hall, and presently Billy returned in front of the otter, who threw himself on the rat with an embrace and a shout of affectionate greeting. "Get off!" sputtered the rat with his mouth full. "Thought I should find you here all right," said the otter cheerfully. "They were all in a great state of alarm along river bank when I arrived this morning. Rat never been home all night, nor mole either. Something dreadful must have happened, they said, and the snow had covered up all your tracks, of course. But I knew that when people were in any fix, they mostly went to Badger, or else Badger got to know of it somehow. So I came straight here through the wild wood and the snow. My, it was fine coming through the snow as the red sun was rising and showing against the black tree trunks. As you went along in the stillness, every now and then masses of snow slid off the branches, suddenly with a flop, making you jump and run for cover. Snow castles and snow caverns had sprung up out of nowhere in the night, and snow bridges, terraces, ramparts. I could have stayed and played with them for hours. Here and there great branches had been torn away, and by the sheer weight of the snow, and robins perched and hopped on 'em in their perky, conceited way, just as if they had done it themselves. A ragged string of wild geese passed overhead, high in the grey sky, and a few rooks whirled over the trees, inspected, and flapped off homewards with a disgusted expression. But I met no sensible being to ask the news of. About halfway I came upon a rabbit, sitting on a stump, cleaning his silly face with his paws. He was a pretty scared animal when I crept up behind him and placed a heavy fur paw on his shoulder. I had to cuff his head once or twice to get any sense out of it at all. At last I managed to extract from him that Mole had been seen in the wild wood last night by one of them. It was the talk of the burrows, he said, how Mole, Mr. Rat's particular friend, was in a bad fix, how he had lost his way, and they were up and out hunting, and were chivying him round and round. And why didn't any of you do something? I asked. You mayn't be blessed with brains, but there are hundreds and hundreds of you, big stout fellas as fat as butter, and your burrows running in all directions, and you could have taken him in and made him safe and comfortable, or tried to, at all events. What, us? He merely said. Do something. Us rabbits. So I cuffed him again and left him. There was nothing else to be done. At any rate, I'd learned something, and if I had the luck to meet any of them, I'd have learnt something more, or they would. Weren't you at all nervous? Asked the Mole, some of yesterday's terror coming back to him at the mention of the wild wood. Nervous? Oh, the Otter showed a gleaming set of strong white teeth as he laughed. Good eye, I'd give 'em nerves if any of them tried anything on with me. Here, Mole, fry me some slices of ham, like the good little chap you are. I'm frightfully hungry, and I've got any amount to say to Ratty here. Haven't seen him for an age. So the good-natured Mole, having cut some slices of ham, set the hedgehogs to fry it, and returned to his own breakfast, while the Otter and the Rat, their heads together, eagerly talked river shop, which is long shop, and talk that is endless, running on like the babbling river itself. A plate of fried ham had just been cleared and sent back for more when the Badger entered, yawning and rubbing his eyes, and greeted them all in his quiet, simple way, with kind inquiries for everyone. It must be getting on for luncheon time, he remarked to the Otter. Better stop and have it with us. You must be hungry this cold morning. Rather, replied the Otter, winking at the Mole. The sight of these greedy young hedgehogs stuffing themselves with fried ham makes me feel positively famished. The hedgehogs, who were just beginning to feel hungry again after their porridge, and after working so hard at their frying, looked timidly up at Mr. Badger, but were too shy to say anything. Here, you too, youngsters. Be off home to your mother, said the Badger kindly. I'll send someone with you to show the way. You don't want any dinner today, I'll be bound. He gave them 6 pence apiece and a pat on the head, and they went off with much respectful swinging of caps. Presently they all sat down to luncheon together. The Mole found himself placed next to Mr. Badger, and as the other two were still deep in river gossip, from which nothing could divert them, he took the opportunity to tell Badger how comfortable and homelike it all felt to him. Once well underground, he said, you know exactly where you are. Nothing can happen to you, and nothing can get at you. You're entirely your own master, and you don't have to consult anybody or mind what they say. Things go on all the same overhead, and you let them, and don't bother about 'em. When you want to, up you go, and there the things are, waiting for you. The Badger simply beamed on him. That's exactly what I say, he replied. There's no security or peace and tranquility except underground. And then, if your ideas get larger and you want to expand, why, a dig and a scrape, and there you are. If you feel your house is a bit too big,
You stop up a hole or two, and there you are again. No builders, no tradesmen, no remarks passed on you by fellows looking over your wall, and above all, no weather. Look at Rat now. A couple of feet of floodwater, and he's got to move into hired lodgings. Uncomfortable, inconveniently situated, and horribly expensive. Take Toad. I say nothing against Toad Hall. Quite the best house in these parts, as a house. But supposing a fire breaks out, where's Toad? Supposing tiles are blown off, or walls sink or crack, or windows get broken, where's Toad? Supposing the rooms are draughty, I hate a draught myself, where's Toad? No, up and out of doors is good enough to roam about and get one's living in, but underground, to come back to it last, that's my idea of home.
The Mole assented heartily, and the Badger, in consequence, got very friendly with him.
When lunch is over, he said, I'll take you all round this little place of mine. I can see you will appreciate it. You understand what domestic architecture ought to be, you do.
After luncheon, accordingly, when the other two had settled themselves into the chimney corner and had started a heated argument on the subject of eels, the Badger lighted a lantern and bade the Mole follow him. Crossing the hall, they passed down one of the principal tunnels, and the wavering light of the lantern gave glimpses on either side of rooms both large and small, some mere cupboards, others nearly as broad and imposing as Toad's dining hall. A narrow passage at right angles led them into another corner, and here the same thing was repeated. The Mole was staggered at the size, the extent, the ramifications of it all, at the length of the dim passages, the solid vaultings of the crammed store chambers, the masonry everywhere, the pillars, the arches, the pavements. "How on earth, Badger," he said at last, "did you ever find time and strength to do all this? It's astonishing."
"It would be astonishing indeed," said the Badger simply, "if I had done it. But as a matter of fact, I did none of it, only cleaned out the passages and chambers as far as I had need of them. There's lots more of it all round about. I see you don't understand, and I must explain it to you. Well, very long ago, on the spot where the wild wood waves now, before ever it had planted itself and grown up to what it is now, there was a city of people, you know. Here, where we are standing, they lived and walked and talked and slept and carried on their business. Here they stabled their horses and feasted. From here they rode out to fight or drove out to trade. They were a powerful people and rich, great builders. They built to last, for they thought their city would last forever."
"But what has become of them all?" asked the Mole.
"Who can tell?" said the Badger. "People come, they stay for a while, they flourish, they build, and they go. It is their way. But we remain. There were badgers here, I've been told, long before that same city ever came to be, and now there are badgers here again. We are an enduring lot. We may move out for a time, but we wait and are patient, and back we come, and so it will ever be."
"Well, and when they went at last, those people?" said the Mole.
"When they went," continued the Badger, "the strong winds and persistent rains took the matter in hand, patiently, ceaselessly, year after year. Perhaps we Badgers, in our small way, helped a little too. Who knows? It was all down, 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 gradually. Ruin and leveling and disappearance. Then it was all up, 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 gradually, as seeds grew to saplings, and saplings to forest trees, and bramble and fern came creeping in to help. leaf mold rose and obliterated. Streams in their winter freshets brought sand and soil to clog and to cover, and in course of time our home was ready for us again, and we moved in. Up above us, on the surface, the same thing happened. Animals arrived, liked the look of the place, took up their quarters, settled down, spread and flourished. They didn't bother themselves about the past. They never do. They're too busy. The place was a bit humpy and hillocky, naturally, and full of holes, but that was rather an advantage. And they don't bother about the future either. The future when perhaps the people will move in again, for a time, as may very well be. The wild wood is pretty well populated by now with all the usual lot, good, bad, and indifferent. I name no names. It takes all sorts to make a world, but I fancy you know something about them yourself by this time. I do indeed, said the mole with a slight shiver. Well, said the badger, patting him on the shoulder, it was your first experience of them, you see. They're not so bad, really, and we must all live and let live. But I'll pass the word round tomorrow, and I think you'll have no further trouble. Any friend of mine walks where he likes in this country, or I'll know the reason why. When they got back to the kitchen again, they found the rat walking up and down, very restless. The underground atmosphere was oppressing him and getting on his nerves, and he seemed really to be afraid that the river would run away if he wasn't there to look after it. So he had his overcoat on and his pistols thrust into his belt again. "Come along, Mole," he said anxiously as soon as he caught sight of them. "We must get off while it's daylight. Don't want to spend another night in the wild wood again." "It'll be all right, my fine fellow," said the otter. "I'm coming along with you, and I know every path blindfold. And if there's a head that needs to be punched, you can confidently rely upon me to punch it." "You really needn't fret, Ratty," added the badger placidly. "My passages run further than you think, and I've bolt holes to the edge of the wood in several directions. I don't care for everybody to know about them. When you really have to go, you shall leave by one of my shortcuts. Meantime, make yourself easy and sit down again." The rat was nevertheless still anxious to be off and attend to his river. So the badger, taking up his lantern again, led the way along a damp and airless tunnel that wound and dipped, part vaulted, part hewn through solid rock, for a weary distance that seemed to be miles. At last, daylight began to show itself confusedly through tangled growth overhanging the mouth of the passage, and Badger, bidding them a hasty goodbye, pushed them hurriedly through the opening, made everything look as natural as possible again, with creepers, brushwood, and dead leaves, and retreated. And here's a picture of the animals, otter and rat and mole, making their way out. They found themselves standing on the very edge of the wild woods. Rocks and brambles and tree roots behind them confusedly heaped and tangled. In front, a great space of quiet fields, hemmed by lines of hedges black on the snow, and far ahead, a glint of the familiar old river, while the wintry sun hung red and low on the horizon. The otter, as knowing all the paths, took charge of the party, and they trailed out on a beeline for a distant stile. Pausing there a moment and looking back, they saw the whole mass of the wild wood, dense, menacing, compact, grimly set in vast white surroundings. Simultaneously, they turned and made swiftly for home, for firelight and the familiar things it played on, for the voice, sounding cheerfully outside their window, of the river that they knew and trusted in all its moods, that never made them afraid with any amazement.
As he hurried along, eagerly anticipating the moment where he would be at home again among the things he knew and liked, the mole saw clearly that he was an animal of tilled field and hedgerow, linked to the ploughed furrow, the frequented pasture, the lane of evening lingerings, the cultivated garden plot. For others, the asperities, the stubborn endurance, or the clash of actual conflict that went with nature in the rough. He must be wise, must keep to the pleasant places in which his lines were laid, and which held adventure enough in their way to last for a lifetime. And that's the end of chapter 4. So we will start chapter 5 at 7 p.m. when I return to this mortal coil. No, just to Facebook. Anyway, so with that, it's actually 1 minute after 2, so it ran a little longer than I thought finishing that chapter. So with that, I thank you all so very much for joining me, for putting up with my rambling and all of my reflections on the day today and things like that, and my weird screed about religion and morals, which I hope was clear. Nothing against religion, but the idea that you can't be moral without it is something that bothers me, because I grew up with some of the most moral people in the world and they were not religious. But what matters is what I'm going to tell you right now, which is be good to yourself, be good to your friends and your loved ones, and to anybody else around you who seems like they might need a hand or at least a kind word. And please come back and join me either at 7 p.m. or next week, or if you're listening to this or watching this from YouTube, on the next YouTube episode. And until then, I say thank you so very much for joining me, and peace. Be well.